bit on that hustling part there? What do you mean by hustling?
These are just some ideas from different people, what they felt. So they felt it's a hustle, and what they mean by that is it's a constant process that you've always got to be reaching out to people. That unless you're very fortunate and businesses coming in, you've got to be reaching out to people. Otherwise, they may not even know you're there. So that's really what the hustle part means. So a question that's often asked is, are salespeople born or are they made? What are your thoughts on that?
90%.
Both. 100% made?
90%.
90% made. No?
I disagree. I think that there are people who are very comfortable putting themselves out there, and I think that's what you're born with. And you can circumvent it by training and working really hard at that. But I think people who are naturally interactive people make better salespeople than people who have shyness. Like if I'm face to face, I can talk to anybody. On the phone, I don't do it. So I think that's just where my comfort level is. Could I overcome it? Yeah, but I'm born with that shyness on the phone.
Okay, so you're born, but there's things you can learn.
You can overcome it, but I think that what skills you have that you're born with make you either a really great salesman or an okay salesperson.
Right. Any other idea? No, you're just giving a class.
Well, I guess I would offer that a person's early development, if their family has a salesperson as a parent or as a relative, or if they're on a farm, for example, they have to sell their product, it's more in your blood than if you have an early childhood with no one who's doing that type of thing.
Okay. So there's differences of opinion. You feel 90% you're born with, and the rest you make up by learning. Yeah. So I think really, and again,
No, the opposite.
no, you were saying you're born at 90%, right?
Yeah,
No, I think 90% you can fashion your skills yourself.
Okay.
Develop that confidence, or
Right.
get that insecurity, whatever you have, and you can certainly become that personable or gregarious person.
Right.
But there are some people that definitely, there are some things that you're certainly born
Yeah.
with that are very, very hard to just learn.
But you have maybe a predisposition too, that you just have that ability. That's the 10%. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Right. So if you break it down, born and made, I think what it is, there's really two sides to selling. There's the art of selling, and then there's the science of selling. And the art is really where you're born and made. The born is that 10%. The art of just having that ability of knowing how to connect with people. Sometimes just people have that innate understanding of how to do that. But there's no question that as long as you have some sense of it, you can build on it and learn from it. The science part, I think, is much more, it's a formula really that you need to learn. And if you can add the two together, the art and the science, and we'll be breaking the two down, if you can put the two together, you really can be a very effective salesperson and do well for yourself and for the company that you represent. So the science of selling is what we'll start with, and that's really, these are the steps that you need to go through when you're going through the sales process. We'll be getting into each of them more later on, but just an outline of what they are. Obviously the first is the prospecting. You need to figure out who is it that I need to go after, because as we were just saying before, unless you're very lucky, they're not going to be calling you every day. You need to figure out who they could potentially be. They may not end up being, but just who they could potentially be. And then you need to figure out how to go and sit down with them just to see what their needs are and see if you can help them with your benefits. And that's where the qualifying comes in. By sitting down with them, either speaking with them on the phone or meeting with them, you're going to understand. That's what qualifying means. You're going to figure out, is this something where I can be of help to this prospect or not? And that's really what qualifying is all about. And if you find that this is a potential fit, then that's where the presenting comes in, which is the core of the sale. More times than not, there's going to be some type of an objection, which when someone raises an objection to you and they say it's too much, or whatever the case may be, we're just not in the market right now, whatever it is, the fact that they're giving you some kind of an objection is actually not something to feel that they're actually saying no. It shows that there is a level of interest, and you should actually embrace that. And all you need to do, and again we'll talk about this, is overcome that objection. And you do that by isolating and figuring out what is the true thing that's holding them back, and then you focus on that to overcome that. Closing the sale is another big piece. One of the biggest mistakes that salespeople make is they give a flawless presentation. Everything's fantastic. And then they'll say to the prospect, thank you so much for listening to me today, and they walk out the room. And it's just human nature that people typically need to be asked for something for them to say yes. So you always have to remember that. And that's what closing is. And you can be doing that all the way along, getting moments of agreement from the prospect. We'll talk about that. And then following up. More often than not, people may not say yes that day. And again, where salespeople fall down is they forget to follow up. And it's the most basic part of selling, really, being able to follow up and just check back in with the prospect as they're getting closer and closer to that yes. But most salespeople don't do it. There's a rule called 7 touches in sales, which means you typically will have to at least touch the prospect 5 times. And a touch could just be handing a business card over. It could be checking in with them on the phone. Obviously, meeting with them and presenting is a touch. Following up is another touch. But typically, an average sale, you've got to do that 5 times before someone says yes. And then referrals is another part that Todd and I were just chatting before we started today. In the car business, they are fantastic at doing that. They'll never let you leave with a car without a handful of their business cards and say, please hand this on to friends who may be in the market for buying a car. I think car dealers, realtors do a fantastic job as well with doing that. So we're looking at referrals as well. So that's the science of selling, and then the art of selling, which, as we talked about, is really where you start with some sense of understanding what sales is about. You're just born with this ability, or at least a feeling that you like talking to people and like listening to them. And that, I just wanted to mention, that's another a key part where people say, a lot of people say, I think I'm great at sales because I love talking to people. And so many people say that. But the reality is, you've got to enjoy listening to people in an authentic way. It's not just about being good at speaking. It's about actually listening, which is one of the words that came up. So what are the most important skills for a salesperson to possess? And on those cards, if you want to just on your own, just to jot down a few ideas, and then we'll share them after, just for a few minutes. What are the most important skills you think you have right now, or you'd like to learn, or you feel the salesperson should have to be successful in their trade? So just spend a few minutes on that. Does anyone want to shout out a few ideas?
Having the organizational skills to be able to work through the whole process to complete the sale.
Organizational skills, okay.
Knowledge of product.
And that one could also be, which is absolutely true, knowledge of product. It's also a great knowledge of your competitor's product. I think that's another part where you absolutely should have a good grasp of, so you know how, even though they may be doing a good job, what you're doing differently, and maybe even better, that you can communicate to the prospect. What else?
It's a passion for your product.
Excellent. And that so easily can be, an authentic passion is so easily picked up. There's a great quote that says, the one thing more contagious than enthusiasm is lack of it. Which is really so true. I mean, negative. And that can happen in a sales office. If there's some people who just get down because sales aren't working out for them, that can spread so quickly. So to be positive not only within the sales office, but also when you're in front of a prospect is absolutely key.
Well, if you're not passionate about your product, why would your customers?
Exactly right. Yeah, it's true.
So, along with that is a sense of fun and joy. In other words, you want them to be glad when you walk through the door and not want to be in the room when you come.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think a thick skin and being able to smile in the face of adversity helps.
Right, absolutely. So maybe like perseverance. I don't know how you spell it. Thick skin.
You need good spelling skills.
So you mentioned what you were saying about you want somebody to be happy that you've come into the room. What would you say is the most effective way to do that?
Connect with them as a person.
Right.
You know, not about, you know, it's like wanting to meet them because they're them and not because of their position.
Right.
In other words, or seeing them as a human being with value, not just monetary value.
Right, exactly.
Yes, I think it's really important that you've made it a connection with them, and when you go in, you remind them of something to do with that connection. That way you've actually, you know, said, if they don't quite remember who you are, they might remember the conversation that was about them,
Right.
in a sense. So keeping that connection just open between the two.
Right, absolutely. Because I think the dirty little secret about human nature is that morning, noon, and night, for the most part, we're thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about the sale. It's actually a great the radio station that salespeople. It's WIIFM, which is what's in it for me. And when you're talking, I don't know how you could read that. I can't even read it. I'm not going to forget the flip chart. That's what people are thinking about. If you go to a prospect and you're asking them questions, they'll become engaged because you're genuinely, and you have to be genuine. It can't be fake. But if you're genuinely interested in them, they're going to engage much more easily. Dale Carnegie, his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I'm sure some of you have read, it really, any sales book that you read goes back to that book. It's just an incredible book, not just about selling, but how to be successful in life and in relationships. How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie. And there's a story in it where he went to dinner with a woman, and they had a great dinner, and at the end of it, somebody said to the woman, "What do you think about Dale?" And she said, "Boy, he's a fascinating character." And the reality is he hadn't really said anything about himself. All he did was ask her questions. And because she was interested in talking about herself, she enjoyed the dinner. So there's definitely something to be said for that in terms of being interested, genuinely interested and authentic in other people. What else? Charlie?
Follow through.
Follow through.
And in that, when I'm thinking about there, we used to teach the sales course I had, was the fact that it's okay to say no. Don't try to BS, like, I don't know. Don't try to BS the client, but the follow through is, I'll get back to you immediately with the answer.
Right.
You're not going to know all the answers.
Right.
More than likely. So the follow through of getting back to the client or the customer or the potential customer is really the key skill. That if you say, I'll get you the answer, you better do it or else you've lost that customer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And under-promising and over-delivering in terms of that. There are so many times I've seen where people will say that. They'll say, I don't know, let me get back to you, and they don't. And then all the trust is absolutely out the window. Yeah.
I think you've hit on a big word there, trust and confidence. Partly product knowledge, partly empathizing, but people have to trust who you are, I think.
No question about it. That could be the biggest word, is trust. People, why do people buy? When do they buy? They buy when they trust you. And if they don't trust you, they won't buy. And it's really as simple as that. And the world that we're living in now, with all the access to information that the prospect has, that's become more key now than ever before. I think back in the day, you could have that salesperson that pushes something on somebody because they don't know any different. They don't know what the answers are. Now they can go online. They have all this information they have access to. So now more than ever, you've got to be able to build that trust for people to buy from you.
We have to be honest.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a tough thing because the stereotype of salespeople has in the past not necessarily been that. And maybe that worked before, but people typically agree now more than ever that kind of a salesperson doesn't work.
You may get the sale once, but the repeat business doesn't come back.
And in Vermont, that's repeat business is huge. Yeah.
It's huge business.
Right, exactly. In a limited market, you've got to rely on word of mouth and building up a great reputation. And if you're not being honest, that very soon, you're absolutely right, maybe you'll make a sale or two. But it's not gonna, there's no longevity to that at all.
Well, coming from Manhattan, where you're one of the big units, and moving here, where everybody can look your name up in the phone book.
Right.
You get a bad rep in this town, and it's not only this town, it flows in this state fast.
It absolutely does. There's so Kevin Bacon thinks he has 6 degrees. He thinks that's pretty cool. We're 2 degrees at most. Everyone knows somebody who knows somebody. And in selling and in business, that can be a fantastic thing or it can be a terrible thing if you're not doing the right thing. So here's just from other trainings, just some other ideas on what. Thank you. On some of the great skills that salespeople can have to be successful. So talking about listening and being, just some other ideas, what makes a great salesperson, it's really broken down into 3 areas. We talked about trust, and that obviously is a key one. Putting the customer first is the golden rule. Having empathy for them. Empathy is something we haven't mentioned that word yet, but that's another key part in selling. And really empathy is sympathy, but it takes it even further. It's not just feeling for someone, it's really understanding what their problems are. And in selling, that's what it is. It's understanding what are the pain points, what are the problems that the prospect has that I can genuinely help him or her with. Empathizing, somebody put it really well. They said, empathy is your pain in my heart. So it's truly bringing in what their problems are. So empathy can be a huge skill to have in the sales field. Being an expert in your field, we talked about that, and that's not only an expert in your product knowledge, but also the competitor's product knowledge. Following up, we talked about that. And then looking the part. Again, there's no right or wrong to this, but typically, as a rule, the way you should present yourself when you go and present is really at least the same as the person you're speaking with. You don't want to be wearing a suit if they're wearing jeans, because they may see you as just a salesperson coming in through the door. But on the other hand, you don't want to be wearing jeans if they're wearing a suit. So the rule is really just to be either the same as them or maybe one higher, but somewhat close to them, so there's that feeling of communication and you can build trust because they feel you're on an equal field. Any other thoughts on that? Do you agree with that?
Phil, just a couple of comments about the follow-up part. The follow-up really is two aspects of follow-up. It's following up after you've actually made the sale to make sure that they're happy and satisfied. Play a game called Who Do You Know Who at that point. Which means who do you know who might also be interested in the same product, so that you refer. That's one part of it. But the other follow-up has to do, you did mention this before, that it takes 5 hits before you can get one sale. When in a former life, I actually lived in his part of the world. I was in England for 7 years. I was sent over there as a managing director of an American company to run their European operation. The operation wasn't going particularly well, which is why I was sent to fix it. And I was dealing with big companies, Sainsbury's, Asda, B&Q, Home Base. These are all big chains. They're like Safeway here or any of the big DIY stores around. And do you think they wanted to talk to me? Absolutely not. But I didn't give them choice. And I didn't give a choice because if I got in front of them once and got kind of who they were, I always was able to come up with something later on to give me a reason to contact them. It wasn't just calling them up one more time and say, hey, how about that order? It was a question of following up and saying, here's a new product we have, thought you might want to know about. Thought you might want to know about how much money your competitors are making off of our product. Last month, we gave a check for X number of dollars. It's always something that, it's not just picking up the phone and talking, it's sending them something, calling them with a tidbit of information that they're going to find useful or valuable to them. So there's really 2 different kinds of follow-ups.
That's a great point. And it's always good to have, as you said, something new that you're following up with. So sometimes when someone says, well, I'll check in with you, if they're not ready to buy it, and you say, well, I'll check in with you in a couple of months, and you call back, but there's nothing new, often that doesn't go anywhere. But if it's just something that you have new to let them know about your business, then that's a great reason to be calling up and following through. Someone, sorry.
And just to that point, like, just give you an example the other day, like, I actually like sold something that doesn't benefit me at all, like that, you know, that benefited the customer.
Right.
It didn't help my end goal, but, you know, I was able to extend that relationship and have a reason to follow up, and then actually got a referral out of it. You know,
And what a
so
great
I
way to
didn't
build
get
trust.
the initial sale, but
Right.
got something completely different.
And sometimes, and I think that is a difference between mediocre salespeople and great salespeople, where you see, you know what, I can't help this person. And you honestly say that to them. That's a great way to build credibility. And then if they have a friend who they know you can help, they'll say this person is authentic and honest and real. And it's a great way to build credibility. Whereas if you just do whatever you can to make that sale, maybe you will make it. But ultimately, in the long term, you're really not helping yourself, and certainly not the customer.
I had an experience yesterday that was very unique. It was a cold call, a phone call that I got, and after the person said hello, they sort of did a little chuckle and said, "This is a sales call." You know, and that really said, they're being honest.
What did they say?
This is a sales call.
All right. Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't the first thing they said, but it was within the first minute of talking. They said, you know, this is a sales call. I've seen your product, I know, I've read about your company, you don't, or whatever. And I just wanted to let you know what we have to offer. And it turned into a really lovely 5-minute conversation. And the impression I got of that person and their company was so positive. But rather than somebody stringing you along for 5 minutes and not telling you who their company is, what they do, and why they're calling you, you know, I get so annoyed when I have to stop what I'm doing and I have to pry out of them who they are, what they're doing, you know. And so this was such a flip side of that I ended up with a really positive feeling about the phone call, even though it was a cold call, with a product I didn't need because they were a competitor to somebody I already used, and I'm satisfied. But I might say to somebody else, you know, check out this place because I got a really good feeling from them.
Right.
And how they presented themselves was unique in the phone call sales, cold call that I've experienced.
Right, that's great. Thanks for sharing it. Yeah, that's great. We talk about listening. Just a question. I mentioned the quote before, and I have a prize for anyone who can remember this, who said the quote, "Nothing happens until you sell something," and it was a sales guru. And if you remember his name, I have a prize that could potentially be worth $60 million. It's a Powerball ticket. Does anyone remember his name?
Warren Buffett.
Something Tracy. Couldn't hear what he said.
Yes. You got his last name. You won it. That's great. So good luck, because tonight, the estimated win is $60 million. Brian Tracy.
Check the data. Check the data.
Brian Tracy.
Brian Tracy, exactly. And if you, at the end, I'll recommend that book, but it's The Psychology of Selling, and it really gets in. Back in the day, I was doing the audio cassettes, and it's fantastic. It just goes into so much about
Can you say?
the psychology of selling. It's Brian Tracy.
Okay.
So being trustworthy is definitely a key attribute. Being assertive is obviously another important area. Having that ability, that's something that you could maybe be born with, but you can always practice it. And that involves anticipating objections, understanding what may come up potentially as roadblocks, being logical, having a thought process in terms of what are the stages that I get to take the prospect from high resistance to low resistance and getting them to the yes. Asking for the sale, that's absolutely a critical part of being assertive. At the end of that great presentation or wherever the stage may be, asking for the business. We'll talk about different ways on how you ask. And then always looking to increase your units per transaction, which means you may have a product, but it may have sister products, or it may have additional products that you want to let them know about. Don't just be thinking, that's fantastic, I've made the sale, and you get out as quick as you can. Think about other ways that you can help the customer. Because the easiest sale is not only right after you've made one, but also with a current customer, because you've gone through all that work on building trust. Then see how else you can help them. So being assertive is the second area. And the third area is staying optimistic. John?
Sorry, just
No,
going
please.
back to the one before, there's another concept I would add to that, and that is to assume a sale.
Right. Yes.
Because it will change your whole attitude to the whole sales process if you were assuming from the very beginning that person was going to buy something from you.
Right. So saying when rather than if, when you buy the product. That's a great point. Yeah. Do you typically in your sales, do you say when? Is that something you put into your presentation, that you'll make that assumption that the sale's going to happen? That's something you do.
I think you can expand a little bit on the fourth one there, in that when you're talking about increasing your units,
Yeah.
really when you're not just reviewing if there are other products that you can offer, you're being thorough in explaining exactly what you do. And I'm lucky in our position that we actually are required to do that. If I sell one particular product, I have to ask about, well, where do you have an umbrella